Good morning, everyone, and good morning to all those who are watching in the United States, as well as our friends and colleagues in Europe and elsewhere. I'm Glenn Howard. I'm the president of the Jamestown Foundation, and we're really delighted that we can have you listening in today, and greetings to everyone. And this is a very exciting topic for us to host today. Today, the title of our event is Russia's Iranian drone offensive against Iran, and it's certainly been a very timely topic. As many of you know, over the past couple of weeks, the Russian army has been actively using Iranian-manufactured Shahed 136 and Mohajer 6 drones to target Ukrainian cities, including Odesa. They've also targeted non-military targets as well, killing hundreds of civilians in the process in Ukraine. But by early November, after nearly a month of intensive use against Ukraine, Russia has spent the entire batch of 300 drones that were originally provided by Iran to Russia, according to Ukraine's Minister of Defense, Alexei Reznikov. Meanwhile, Russia has reportedly procured a total of between 1,500 and 2,400 more drones from Iran, and there's more than 200 Iranian drones are supposed to be arriving this month as more advanced Iranian drones are arriving, and including rumors of Iranian ballistic missile transfers are on their way, along with thousands of munitions. Even today, from operating facilities in northern Crimea, there's been reports of at least 10 Iranians have been killed in Ukrainian countermeasure airstrikes and also its own attacks against these facilities launching the drones. So it's very obvious that Ukraine faces a very dire threat from a neighbor to the south that's eager to get itself involved in the war and supporting Russia in its war against Ukraine. We're very happy today to have all of these very distinguished experts and speakers with us. Joining us today is Ukraine's Deputy Minister of Defense, Vladimir Havrilov, who is very well known to many of you. He's been a frequent commentator and participant at Jamestown events in the past. He once was a writer for Eurasian Daily Monitor, in fact. Prior to becoming Deputy Minister of Defense, he was also Ukrainian Defense Attaché in the United Kingdom and Romania. Also joining us today is Dr. Jean Kashapalou, who's a non-resident senior fellow at the Hudson Institute, and he's also a senior fellow at the Jamestown Foundation. He is also the director of the defense program at the Turkish think tank İDAM. He holds a PhD from Turkish War College, and he's also a very frequent commentator and writer for Jamestown publications on Iranian drones and other drone issues. So we consider him a one of the predominant experts in the world, I think, on drones, and especially Turkish and Iranian drones. Last but not least, joining us will be retired Supreme Allied Commander Europe, Philip Breedlove. General Breedlove is also a member of the board of the Jamestown Foundation. We're delighted he's a part of our little small group at Jamestown, and he's very well known, outspoken, strategic planner, motivational leader, and talented communicator. And he's also a former pilot. So he's been very active in Ukraine, and we're just delighted he'll be commenting today on the presentations by our two speakers. So on that note, there's been a lot of devastation with Iranian drones against Ukraine, and I'd like to turn the floor over to Ukrainian Deputy Minister of Defense, retired General Vladimir Havrilov. Sir, the floor is yours.
Good morning. I'm very glad to take part in this very important conversation. We are now in the 9th month of war with Russia, and this war is about drones as well. I think it's the first conflict in the modern history when both sides are using a lot of unmanned aerial vehicles and drones and other systems, and both sides are very tricky and creative to use the modern technologies. And Ukraine, we also face this challenge from the beginning of this conflict, with Russian drones used in artillery, in surveillance, and also in targeting. So for us, this phenomenon isn't new, because we faced the first challenge of drones during the first war, 2014-2015. But this war is a little bit exceptional because of the new technologies are coming to the market. And challenge with Iranian drones is I wouldn't say it was a very critical one, but it is a new one. Russia didn't have that kind of capability in terms of the loitering munition like Shahed, with a distance of more than several hundred kilometers. That's why they used it. Firstly, they started to use them very often in the beginning of October, I think, and they targeted first some infrastructure objects. And especially during the last several weeks, they sent a swarms of Shahed loitering munition to target our energy system, trying to suppress our generation system, and trying to create problems for our economy. Yes, it was a challenge. We lost up to 30% of our generation capability in Ukraine because of use of not only these drones, but also cruise missiles and other missiles Russia used during the last several weeks. So the problem was that it is a low altitude, I wouldn't say very quiet, but not very visible for air defense drones. And they use remote control operators for targeting the infrastructure or objects deep inside our territories. And this distance control, remote control, means the involvement of satellite communication, GPS navigation, other systems, which are very sophisticated. And it took for several weeks for us to understand the challenge and to find the right solution how to face it. First of all, it's very cheap systems with a price maybe $20,000 per piece. And it's not very economically feasible to use air defense missiles with a price of $50,000 or $100,000 to shoot down these drones. That's why we were looking for solutions how to hit them with artillery or some other means, or maybe jamming. But most important, of course, is to create a system of detection, the early warning for these drones to be monitored, to be targeted, and to be rightly hit by small arms or some not very expensive air defense systems like manpads. And so we spend a lot of time just to creating that system of surveillance and observation using different methods and very known methods and solutions. And now, more or less after several weeks of attacks of these drones, we are very successful with targeting them. In total, our statistics up to the date is that Russians, they used around 412 Shahed type drones against us, and we shot down 316. It's a good effectiveness, and I think in 2 or 3 weeks we will have more or less a very predictable solution how to target Shahed type drones, which are low speed, and they could be observed by our military and in civilian people, and they are very noisy because this acoustic phenomenon can contribute to the early detection of these things. At the same time, yes, we expect that Russia will use more advanced systems from Iran, and we are just working on how to strengthen our capability to challenge it, to stop it. We know that the total contract or just obligation between Russia and Iran on Shahed type of drones is around 1,200, 1,300 pieces. And so they deliver them in in 200-300 numbers, maybe once in a week or maybe 2 weeks, using Russian ports and other things. But once again, Shahed is not a challenge, I think, for the current conflict in Ukraine in next several weeks or months. So we will have a solution to stop it. We are more concerned about ballistic missiles, which could emerge from Iran in Russia. According to preliminary estimations, there is no exact proof of that, but at the same time, we should be ready. And so that's why we are working now on strengthening our air defense capability. Next to the surveillance system and detection of the drones and cruise missiles, we are working on strengthening our air defense capability together with our partners. We started to receive systems like IRIS from Germany, and also NASAM systems from the United States coming to us. And with other countries who are in touch on this subject. The IRIS Germany system, for example, is very effective, 100% result, but at the same time, it's very expensive to use against drones. It could be used only against the very expensive cruise missiles or ballistic missiles, but it's not feasible against drones. Against drones, the best effective cost solution is artillery, air defense artillery, small arms, and jamming. All together, combined with the early warning and detection and surveillance systems, it creates a very good, effective system to stop, not to stop, but to challenge this phenomenon. That's why Ukraine become a test territory for new technologies in drones operations by both sides. And we have to learn a lot from the lessons learned in this conflict. And also we have to keep in mind that future operations, future warfare, it's all about the robotic systems. It's all about drones, other electronic equipment. It's all about jamming. It's all about very secure communication and radars. That's why we have to invest in that kind of technology. We have to be more creative, and we have to use all the modern knowledge of our engineering, how to face the challenge of this kind of technology. But there are always a solution. There is always a solution to any kind of threat from this part of technology. And we found a lot of very creative things here in Ukraine together with our industry, and also in combination with the capabilities and solutions of our partners. I think it could be possible to stop the threat of especially Shahed type of drones or any kamikaze type of drones in the nearest future. That's the general information I wanted just to give you. But nevertheless, we're still working hard how to stop the kamikaze drone threat to our infrastructure first. It's not about military. It's about civilian people. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Volodymyr, for your excellent kind of overview of the situation. Now we'll get into the actual nitty-gritty of Iranian drone use, and we're going to have Jean Kashapalu give his kind of overview and observations about Iranian drone use. I know that in your writings for Jamestown, Jean, you have mentioned that we should be very careful about exaggerating the strengths of Iranian drones because they do have many weak features to them, and I'm not trying to diminish what Iran is doing, but they are using these many different kinds of techniques in swarming and also being very actively trying to overwhelm Ukrainian air defenses. So Jean, kind of share with us what you're thinking about Iranian drone use against Ukraine.
Thank you, Glenn, and greetings to both DC and Ukraine, especially to Ukraine amidst their hard endeavor to defend their country. But actually, I'm going to start with some blockbusters, if you will. First, let's repeat this to understand the level of the threat exposed to the West in the ongoing Russian invasion. Iran is now a drone warfare and soon missile warfare, like general underlying weapon systems exporter to the world's second largest arms exporter. And Iran is doing that in a high tempo campaign, which is practically the invasion of Europe at NATO's doorstep. So this is really something. This is something bigger than the war that we are observing. This is a geopolitical development that I think would dominate strategic talk in the town for the forthcoming years. Second, I'd like to refer to the co-authored piece by myself and my colleague at the Hudson Institute, Mike Doran, at the Tablet magazine. We to actually grasp what is Ukraine facing right now and how not to handle the threat. Starting from the first day of Russia using Iranian Shahed 136 and to a lesser extent Mohajer 6, along with cruise missiles and in some cases ballistic missiles, we see that the Ukrainian Defense Ministry rightfully focusing on air and missile defenses, and both the Western strategic community and Ukrainian, both officials and strategic community, are emphasizing how many drones intercepted per day. Well, actually, this is only the halfway to handle the problem, because drones, cruise missiles, ballistic missiles, and loitering munitions together create what we call an offense-dominant regime. And we have seen that movie in Saudi Arabia, in United Arab Emirates. So this could be new for NATO's eastern flank or Ukraine, but for the Middle East, this is the bread and butter of how Gulf nations live every day with the Iranian proxies, mixed strike packages consisting of all these systems that I tried to explain. So what is the real threat with an offense-dominant regime? Think that you have 80% interception rate, which was the really optimistic reports coming from the Ukrainian defense ministry since the outset. Think that you have 80%, even 90% interception rate of a strike package consisting of 10 Shahed 136, 3 Russian cruise missiles, 1 ballistic missile, and a Mohajer 6 drone. The 10% penetration, which could be humble in math numbers, the 10% penetration can cause a major disruption of critical national infrastructure. We shouldn't forget the fact that these are terror weapons, and General Sergei Surovikin of Russia is intentionally running that campaign for depopulation. This was his modus operandi when he was the commander of the group of forces in Syria. We should also keep in mind that the current Russian commander commanding the invasion of Ukraine was also responsible, directly or indirectly, by the chemical weapons used back in 2017 in Syria, along with deliberate targeting of bakeries, hospitals, critical infrastructure, to create human waves and to oversee depopulation strategies. So he knows this kind of dark arts concepts of operations really well. So the overall, at the end of the day, I wouldn't say instead of, but along with focusing on the interception rates, I think it is also important how Ukraine responded, and more importantly, is the West equipping Ukraine with the ability to counterpunch, because offense-dominant regimes like a sword cannot be counterbalanced or deterred, if you will, solely by using a shield. NASAMS are good. Gepards, like German anti-aircraft artillery, would work maybe the best, given defense economics imbalance that General pointed out, like trying to hunting down a $20,000 worth Iranian loitering munitions with $100,000 interceptor. So I think anti-artillery anti-aircraft artillery would work the best, along with other electronic warfare systems and missiles to some extent. But this is only halfway to counter the threat. Ukraine needs to counterpart. Ukraine needs a shield and a sword along with. And this is ballistic missile configuration in addition to HIMARS. This is maybe an F-16 capability development program for Ukraine. This is long-range fires, but overall, this is not only defensive means. Looking closer at the threat, we see that there is a challenge right now, a fundamental challenge to a line of thought that dominated Washington, D.C. For decades, I would say. So what was the main understanding around Iran? Iran lacking a formidable air power deterrent, and it was a must to refer to the Shah era F-14s, like Iran is still running F-14s, is en masse producing missiles and drones to compensate for conventional shortcomings. Therefore, Iran's missile warfare capacity was perceived as a static force waiting idle in missile silos, solely for strategic defensive means. Well, considering contemporary military realities, that does not make any sense. I mean, not only Ukraine, starting from 2017, Deir Zor strike in Syria, 2019, Aramco oil infrastructure strike in Saudi Arabia, 2020 attacks on the US contingent in Iraq, Ain al-Assad base, and February 2022 strikes on the United Arab Emirates, all with all executed by mixed strike packages consisting of drones, loitering munitions, and missiles of all kinds. This was telling that this was actually shouting out loud that Iran was not wielding a static defensive deterrent. Iran was actually wielding a battlefield use capability. And that capability was not only limited to the Iranian Revolutionary Guards or Artesh, the Iranian military, first the proxies, and now the Russian Federation and the armed forces of the Russian Federation in the ongoing invasion of Ukraine. Now that right now is pertaining to, as general, I think, warned the entire Western strategic community to Iranian ballistic missiles. We are talking about a specific baseline here, the Fatih 110 baseline. Without going into defense geek details, just an overview, we are talking about a solid fuel road mobile family of short-range ballistic missiles based on the rocket DNA. The Zalzal 2 rockets, it is the Soviet free rocket over the ground as known by the Cold War NATO designation. So with the initial batch, we are Fatih 110s, we are talking about 300 kilometers range. With the following Fatih 313, we are talking about 500 kilometers range. The Zulfikar missile baseline, it is the missile that the Iranians used back in 2017 to hit Deir Zor, eastern Syria, as around 700 kilometers range. And very recently, they introduced a later variant, which falls under medium-range ballistic missile with more than 1,000 kilometers range, Haj Qasim, named after Quds Forces then Commander Qasim Soleimani. We shouldn't try to assess Iranian ballistic missiles separately from Iranian loitering munitions or Iranian drones, because we are seeing that the Iranians are not only transferring drone warfare or missile warfare assets to the Russians, but also concepts of operations. So the Russians are using these drones and loitering munitions accompanied by cruise missiles. Most probably now they're gonna enhance their strike packages with Iranian ballistic missiles. Again, that pertains to the initial point I tried to highlight, offense-dominant regime. So even under the wizardry of 80% interception rates or 90% interception rates, my focus would always be with the remaining 10% to 20% penetration, because that 10% to 20% penetration would suffice to terrorize Ukrainian civilian population, will be adequate to target in a meaningful, destructive way Ukrainian critical infrastructure, and especially for high-value targets like political military decision-making centers, like radar installations, like critical air bases, that kind of mix, and also civilian population centers. That kind of mixed strike packages can really, with the offense dominant regime characteristics, can really make a destructive impact, unfortunately, for Ukraine. I'm going to repeat myself, but I think this is an important repetition. How to counter the threat. Ballistic missile defenses is a way to counter the threat. As for drones, anti-aircraft artillery, electronic warfare systems, and interceptor missiles are a good way to counter the threat. But this is only like fighting with one arm in a really tough fight. Ukraine has to counterpunch. So in order to equip Ukraine with the ability to counterpunch, I'm going to refer to, for advertisements, another joint piece by myself and my colleague at Hudson Institute, Peter Rao. The United States and NATO capitals should leave the strategy of confinement. We have to make a decision. Do we want Ukraine to win the war, or do we want Ukraine to save the day? If we want Ukraine to win the war, the optimum way to do that is to equip Ukraine, on the one hand, with defensive strategic weapon systems, and on the other hand, long-range fires, and allow Ukraine to have a real air force. This is why we are promoting the F-16 capability development program, to set the bar high for the Russians to resort to that kind of disruptive warfare capabilities. As my last sentence before leaving the floor to General Breedlove, I think, as for Iran and as for the future of how to handle Iran, we have to make a conceptualization clearance for our minds between a policy and an obsession. Well, the policy of JCPOA, when it was a policy framed by Washington and its allies, the main idea of us was to focus on Iranian nuclear proliferation and leaving all the other aspects of the Iranian problem, namely the proxy warfare, supporting terrorism, and unspoken at the time, generating disruptive military capabilities like the missile proliferation, drone proliferation aside, as I said, like solely focusing on the nuclear issue. Now, that was a policy, and that policy apparently failed. Now we are having Iranian drones and soon Iranian missiles pounding Ukrainian territory. Now, from now on, furthering that policy would not pertain to a policy, but an obsession. The idea of JCPOA would become an obsession, because it is right now clear that Iran and Iran's advanced weaponry generation capacity is not only a NATO southern flank problem or a Middle Eastern problem or a problem that the Saudis or the Emiratis would have to deal with. It is a NATO eastern flank problem. It is a problem for the Ukrainians, Poland, the Baltic states, and so on. And I think to address the problem, we have to save Ukraine right now. We have to equip Ukraine with defensive strategic weapon systems and weapon systems that could counterpunch. But in the long term, and keeping in mind that Russia is launching some of the Iranian assets from the Belarus territory, I think in longer term, we have an Iran and Iranian disruptive military capacity generation problem to address. And we have to reconsider all our critical assumptions in a bipartisan way about how to handle the JCPOA, again, which is not a policy anymore, remained only as an obsession. Thank you.
Thank you for that excellent overview, Jean. That's really interesting, and I think it kind of sets the floor for General Breedlove to give his and share his views on this. I think your comment about Ukraine needs a hammer and a shield is really spot on, and I know that's something that General Breedlove has been thinking about in quite great detail. So, sir, the floor is yours.
So first of all, thanks for having me, Glenn, and it is my distinct pleasure to appear with John and Volodymyr. These are two incredible thinkers about this war. And frankly, we've had some really interesting and incredible commentary on what is actually happening from Volodymyr that has shaped a lot of our thoughts. So it's great to be on stage with these two guys. So my task is to bring a few comments to the things that were said, and I will, but I want to start off the very first with repeating something that General Havilov has said, and that is that in the end, or in the beginning, Ukraine has done very well so far in this drone campaign. I just want to remind folks that I hate the word drone because it connotates something that is mindless and isn't really used by man. And in actuality, almost all quote unquote drones are what we call remotely piloted aircraft. So there is a human and a pilot in the loop to some degree, even with the loitering munitions up to the point that they're released. So keeping in mind that they have to be guided from somewhere helps us to understand how to deal with them. So I will use the term drone because that's what everybody hears, but I just wanted to make my point. So Ukraine has done well, but Ukraine is still taking a lot of damage from these various drones that have been described by both Volodymyr and Jean in this war. And we can, and we the West need to do better at helping Ukraine to get after this problem. Probably the most important thing I like to discuss when it comes to not only a drone problem, but it could also be a counter-air problem or a ballistic missile defense problem, and that is that to beat this problem, we need a system of systems. All too often, the West jumps to, we're going to give them this shiny, bright, in-game killing object, and that is going to solve all the problems. Well, in fact, it doesn't solve all the problems. Of course, we need to be giving Ukraine these capabilities that have the in-game capability to intercept and or kill the incoming drone. But the fact of the matter is that the performance of any, even the best in-game kill mechanisms, the performance is either enhanced or not enhanced by the system that supports it. We all use a term called PK, probability of kill. And when an in-game killing mechanism is supported by a well-defined, well-understood, and well-exercised support systems, then the PK, the probability of kill, goes way up and the damage of the drones go way down. So not to be too basic, but there's some essential steps in any system to defend against drones. And Ukraine has done well in these, and we need to further understand how they're doing them so we can make them even more efficient at these steps. The first, of course, is to sense or see the incoming threat. We talk most often about radar, but there are passive methods to include IR systems that we feel to help us see these drones and where they are coming from. We need to be able to classify them to understand that they are either ours or someone else's. We don't want blue on blue kills, and we want to focus all our efforts on those that we believe are the bad guys. Sometimes that's very simple because Ukraine is not flying any, or their aircraft are not in the local area, and that makes it real simple. But when there is a mixture of aircraft airborne, we need to be able to classify. And in that classification, just like Volodymyr mentioned and John mentioned, sometimes simply jamming is going to be the right solution to get us out of that problem. Once we understand that this is a threat system and it's inbound to a critical target in critical infrastructure, most likely in Ukraine, then we need to target it as a threat and begin to cue our forces in the field as to the location, altitude, and track of that threat, because some weapons have an all aspect capability. Others need to see the drone in a certain way in order to engage. And the better that our commanders in the fields are cued as to where these drones are coming from and what direction and altitude they're at, the less sophisticated kill mechanisms like Stinger and others are much higher probability of kill when they're properly cued. Then we engage them, and in the end game, we hope to shoot them down. This is where we have to think about using the best, and sometimes that may be also the cheapest way to engage the target. We don't want to be shooting a multi-million-dollar missile at a $20,000 drone. And so the system needs to allow us to have some thought as to how we're going to engage in the end game. So being able to see, classify, target, and then engage, giving the Ukrainians kit and capability in each of those categories, and then helping to enable already a system they're pretty good at to be better, then we'll get higher probabilities of kill and lower impact by these drones. And that's what I think I would push for as our policymakers in the West are looking how to help Ukraine. And remember that, as I mentioned before, having some density, meaning capacity, and some variety in sensing, in other words, IR sensing, radar sensing, et cetera, some places, some of our forces even have some really excellent audio sensing capabilities. But having a variety and a density in sensing, combined with a variety and density in jamming, because some systems are more susceptible to different kinds of jamming. And then in the end game, as we said, to have a variety and a capacity or density in the type of in-game kill mechanisms. These are the things I think we need to be thinking about. And one thing to also throw out, we need to increase our help to Ukraine today. But some of these things we're talking about in building this system of systems is actually thinking about Ukraine in 5 years, Ukraine in 10 years, Ukraine in 15 years, so that they can absolutely control the airspace over their country from aggressors like Russia. Jean made some really interesting points, and there's just a couple that are near and dear to my heart, so I'm just going to go ahead and repeat them. And that is not only giving Ukraine the ability to defend itself, but as Jean says, giving them the ability to counterpunch. Not only do we have to give them the ability, frankly, we've already given them some ability to counterpunch, but we need to give them the policy and the approval to go ahead and counterpunch. For instance, right now, remember that Russia is firing into Ukraine from the north in Belarus and Belarusian airspace, from the northeast in Russia, from the southeast in Russia, from Crimea, and from the Black Sea. So Russia is firing into Ukraine from all points of the globe. And we are refusing to allow Ukraine to return fire. And that is a policy decision that I think we have to revisit. I agree with Jean. We need to give them the ability to counterpunch. And it's not only about kit, it's about the policy and the endorsement to allow Ukraine to strike back into those areas that it is being freely struck from. We are giving Russia safe haven to fire into Ukraine. And I think this is a bad policy, and it needs to be tested. And the first place I would try that, you've heard, many of you, the conversation about ATACMS. And we understand that the government is not willing right now to give Ukraine ATACMS because they believe that it's too good a capability to strike into Russia, and we can't allow that to happen. Well, why don't we try a test so that the Ukrainians can prove they can be trusted? I know they already can, but in a policy sense to the policymakers, maybe a limited number of ATACMs so that they could strike some of these Iranian drone sites that are in Crimea, we know, and now we understand may also be in Belarus. Maybe we need to give them the ability to strike into those areas with ATACMs to also counterpunch, as Jean said. And Glenn, you said hammer and a shield. I like Jean's connotation better. He said a sword and a shield. I think we need to put that next level of swords in the hand of our Ukrainian brothers and sisters. And I think I'll stop there so we can get to the questions. That's what people really want to do. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Phil. That's a great overview. And I would just want to ask you if you could clarify for those non-military experts in our audience what a system of systems is. Oh, we lost Phil. There.
No, there we go. Sorry, I hit the wrong button. Pilot error. So all too often when you have a military problem, people think they can buy one weapon and that weapon then takes care of the problems. And that is almost never the case, almost never the case. So the ability to shoot down remotely piloted vehicles or drones is really about a system of systems, a system that allows them to see the target, to classify the target, and then to aim the forces that will engage it, and then allow the forces to engage it. So it's the kit, the tactics, techniques, and procedures, and the policy that allow Ukraine to use a myriad of sensors to then see and classify a target, and then a myriad of different types of kill mechanisms, missiles, Gepards, whatever we want to talk about, to engage the target. And when that system is working together, that thing I call the probability of kill, or PK, goes way up. We can even improve on the Ukrainian performance now. It's good, but we can give them better capability, and that will keep some of this horrendous infrastructure attack that Russia is placing on Ukraine. It can help them with that problem.
Thank you. Thank you for that explanation. I wanted to go, before we start up into questions and answers, we'll be looking for in the chat room for those who want to ask something. Feel free, you can hit the raise your hand button feature on the chat, and we'll try to call upon you, or we'll ask you to give or look for the question. But I guess I wanted to ask John, he said something very interesting about it's not only the fact that Iran is delivering to Russia the drones, but it's also giving Russia the operational concepts on how to use its drones. And that I thought that was a very fascinating observation. And if it's possible, General Havrilov, could you just comment on what you're seeing Iran? Are these concepts that he's talking about that Iran is transferring to Russia? What type of challenges does that present? Jean, could you go in that, and General Havrilov will comment on it? Jean?
Thank you, Glenn. Well, actually, I'm gonna answer that question by capitalizing on what General Breedlove excellently explained as for system of systems, because in his explanation of system of systems, he didn't only talk about the interceptors, but also the sensors. So what, again, the main line of thought, I don't want to say plague, but dominated the DC understanding of Iran and the Iranian threat up until now focused on overwhelming the interceptors. So I think that Ukraine has like 3 NASAMS launchers, and each NASAMS launcher, I think, has 6 AMRAAM missiles. And that 6 AMRAAM missiles in 3 launchers have like 18 in total. And in our mind, a saturation strike was about like sending in 20 threats, 30 threats that would outnumber the interceptors, the base for like 2 interceptors for a threat, but just like framing up the numbers to give a general understanding to the audience. But the Iranian concepts of operations is not only about saturation of interceptors, but also sensors. What do I mean by that? So a loitering munition, a cruise missile, a ballistic missile like Fatih 110 with a quasi-ballistic press trajectory, and yet another ballistic missile, say, like the Qiyam missile with a loop trajectory, with a very different trajectory, and a cruise missile, okay? They have very different flight characteristics, very different homing angles onto the target, very different radar signatures, and the ways to detect them in military terms, in military technological terms, are really different, okay? So that Iranian concepts of operations that they arrived in the Middle East by attacking the South and directly by them and by their proxies like the Houthi militia, that they arrived in the Middle East by attacking the Saudi infrastructure, the Emirates infrastructure, the United States forward presence in the Middle East, is actually based on that idea of using very different systems with very different flight characteristics, very different radar signatures, and very different homing angles in one single strike package to overwhelm the sensor, because you cannot intercept something that you don't see. And if you mix up all these threats in one single strike package, the way to counter them would be really complicated. You are not talking about one single ballistic missile threat. You are not talking about one single cruise missile threat, but you are talking about like the system of systems, like the threat of threats in general. This is not new. As I said, we have seen that movie in the Middle East 4 years, starting from 2017. This is new to NATO's East, and this is new to Ukraine right now. And the bad news is there is no silver bullet to address the threat. The Saudis, the Emiratis, they were spending billions of dollars on American and European weapon systems. But there is something, again, I'm going to refer to our tablet magazine publication with Mike Doran. There is a reason why the Chinese dominated Saudi ballistic missile market. And there is a reason why the Chinese also dominated the Emiratis and the Saudis combat drone market, because the Chinese are not only offering air and missile defense systems, they are offering ballistic missiles to Saudi Arabia. They are offering combat drones without MTC, missile technology control regime limitations, or a congressional block to both Saudi Arabia and United Arab Emirates. They are equipping these nations with a sword. And this is the thing. There is no easy way for Ukraine. There is no easy way to intercept a mixed strike package, but there is a way, and the way is counterpunch. I think we have to ask a simple question to ourselves. Up until now, there was one and only NATO nation that did not refrain from equipping Ukraine with what we call MALE class, medium altitude, long endurance class combat drones armed with real munitions. That is Turkey, Bayraktar TB2, that worked really miracles at the outset of the war. There is a question that we should ask ourselves. Iran is equipping Russia and Belarus with combat drones. Europe and United States is still not doing the same for Ukraine. Why is that gap? Why we are not showing what it takes to follow suit and do what Iran does to support its ally in that war? And the stakes for Iran is way higher compared to the risk that the United States or the Europeans would take. I think that this is the key intel question we have to focus on right now.
Thank you. Joe Havrilov, did you want to comment?
This drone phenomenon in the warfare, modern warfare, is not something very special. And we understood from our experience that the most important to have a system of detection, early warning, and just to understand and know exactly where the targets are. And if you are aware, if you are good in situational awareness, there is no problem to shoot down these kind of drones with very simple things like light arms or man pads. So that's why we started to address this threat with building up the detection and surveillance capability, using not only sensors, radars, or something else, but also just people who can see old World War II fashioned observers who can see on certain direction, watch the certain direction, see the target, and what is important in the modern warfare, to deliver that information immediately to the system, not only to the headquarters or somebody, but to the system, to the iPad or any kind of tablet available in the infantry level. And everybody in the area immediately is aware that there is a target in a certain direction. And then after that, they can concentrate the efforts in identification of the target. And this modern information technology gives us a lot of capability to understand where the targets are from a lot of people and sensors. And after that, with a smart software and smart applications, we can target, and we can kill, and we can destroy these targets. It doesn't matter what we are talking about. Drones, cruise missiles, ballistic missiles is a challenge because nobody can see them immediately. But I witnessed myself cruise missile over my apartment building. And so I had the audio signature of this missile. And I understood as an air defense officer, if I knew about the approach of these missiles in advance, I could shoot down it with something like machine gun or like that. That's why I think in conflicts on the Middle East, like in Saudi Arabia or in other countries, there were no experience of building up this detection capability, surveillance capability, using all sensors and the ordinary people in one system with the modern information technologies, which means exchange of information and deliver it not only to the decision makers, but to other people in the area who can use their own systems just to shoot down the target. That's our experience.
Thank you. That's a very interesting observation. It's basically boiling down the people power. I was going to turn to some questions and answers from the audience. One of the questions was, do you think, are there more advanced drone capabilities that Iran will be giving to the Russian Federation? For example, do you see China providing drone capabilities using Iran as a surrogate or proxy? Do you think that may be coming, General Havrilov?
I don't think that China is interested in sending something of Chinese origin, even through Iran. But we see a lot of non-military, commercial type quadricopters, small quadricopters, Chinese origin, not only Chinese, but others, which are used by both sides, by the way. But talking about the military designed systems, I'm not sure China is interested in sending them to this war. Of course, some components from China could be used by Iran or Russia to manufacture their own designs. But on purpose, I don't think that China is interested in escalating this conflict.
Thank you. There were some questions too. Let's see, I'm going to continue to look here. You had said previously, General Havrilov, that you were concerned about the next wave being delivered from Iran. Are there more advanced Iranian drones on the table to be sent? And I think you've expressed concern about that. And if you can't comment on or don't know, Jean, can you comment on what type of more sophisticated Iranian drones that we may be seeing arriving?
I think, first of all, there are two questions here. Are there more advanced Iranian drones and loitering munitions that they can send? Yes, there are. One comes to my mind is Shahed, based on Iran-captured US Sentinel, which was a high-altitude observation drone. It is the first turbofan system of the Iranian arms manufacturing. It is way more speedy, actually like 3 times more speedy compared to Shahed 136. But there is a problem. One Shahed 36 has a unit cost of $20,000 to $40,000. And this is why the Iranians can easily hand over in large numbers to the Russians. And even the Russians are now co-producing it in the name Geran 2 and Geran 1, 2 different Shahed variants. So yes, there is, but I don't think like they are in large numbers that can sustain such a high tempo warfare like that. We are talking about specifically loitering munitions and drones. When it comes to ballistic missiles, and I completely agree with General Havirlov, that ballistic missiles, in terms of trajectory, in terms of their homing angles, and in terms of their terminal speed, is way harder to detect and way high. Again, like Ukraine cannot use that crowdsourcing sensor, which is really creative, to detect ballistic missiles. I think the next up for Iran to support Russia is not more advanced drones, because Shahed 136 are getting the job done, but ballistic missiles. Solid propellant, road mobile, tactical ballistic missiles based on the Fatih 110 line. I think this will be the next step. But as for the first part of your question, do the Iranians have more advanced loitering munitions and drones? Yes, they have. Definitely they have. And there is one thing we didn't see. We have not seen Iranian cruise missiles ending up in Russia. We know that cruise missiles like Quds 1 and Quds 2, they transferred to the Houthi militia, and those cruise missiles, when accompanied to ballistic missiles and loitering munitions, they inflicted really bad damage on the Saudi and the Emirati infrastructure in the Middle East. And this is something that we haven't seen. I don't know, of course, the beyond the limits of open source intelligence, if General Havirlov and his units, his combat formations, came across with Iran origin cruise missiles in the Ukrainian battleground. But so far, within the limits of open source intelligence, we have detected Iranian conventional drones like Mohajer 6, Iranian loitering munitions, at least 2 to 3 different types. There are news about Iranian ballistic missiles, but not Iranian cruise missiles. I think an alternative next step would also be incorporating Iranian cruise missile capabilities into the Russian missile warfare efforts.
Phil, do you have any comment? Or General Havirlov, did you want to, any other? That's.
No, I totally agree, John, that we still, up to date, we only see some ordinary loitering drones, and yes, we are very concerned about possible ballistic missile delivery from Iran to Russia. We didn't see any effects of cruise missiles from Iran in this war, and no episodes on that. Ballistic missiles, we have to keep it in mind. It's still not confirmed about any kind of deliveries. But we understand that Russia is very limited with, after almost 9 months of war, they are exhausted with the stock of the cruise missiles and ballistic medium-range missiles like Iskander type. And that's why, of course, on one stage, they will try to find kind of replacement on the market. And Iran, of course, is on the list of the most predictable sources of that kind of missiles. We'll see. We'll see.
Okay, let me ask you a question then of General Breedlove. I mean, what is the problem with the U.S. in not being able to give Ukraine the counterpunch capabilities, even with its own drones? I mean, one would think that I mean, you've recommended ATACMS as a way to hit the Iranian drone sites that are operating in northern Crimea. But what seems to be the problem here with this? I mean, one of the persons in the audience and question asked about why is the U.S. hedging on with Jake Sullivan's visit to Kiev and trying to encourage them to negotiate right now? I mean, it seems kind of odd that in the middle of a war, Jake Sullivan is trying to get Ukraine to start talking to the Russians when they're getting pulverized by these Iranian drones, and we're not really trying to give them. I don't think the NASAMS are enough to be a counterpunch capability.
So I'll try to be relatively short, but those are two pretty in-depth questions. The ability to strike back into Russia has been a policy decision from the beginning. We have put restrictions in a policy sense on Ukraine from using weapons that we have given them, from striking into Russia proper. Some will tell you that's all about the United States and the fact that we are largely deterred. And we do not want to encourage Russia broadening the war and broadening into weapons of mass destruction. And that's then is a policy limit that we have internally put on Ukraine. Others say that this is about managing the NATO alliance, and that is that many of our NATO partners and some of our partners non-NATO are willing to help Ukraine defend itself, but then they would get a bit worried or maybe get cold feet if we started giving Ukraine the ability to strike deeply into Russia. I've been very vocal about this from the beginning, and you heard my remarks at the beginning of this program. I believe that Russia is striking Ukraine from all points of the globe, and Ukraine should be able to defend itself back against those sites that are striking Ukraine. And so it would be my plea to our government to rethink its policy limitations and not only allow, but enable Ukraine to be able to fire back against these sites in Russia. We have given Russia a safe zone from which to fight. And that we learned in Afghanistan and other places. If the enemy has a safe zone, that's not going to work well for our forces. And so that's the policy piece. On the National Security Advisor visit, I think that until we really know what Jake Sullivan had to say, we need to just be careful. The bottom line is our country has said over and over, we're going to give Ukraine what it needs. Our country has said over and over that we're not going to push Ukraine prematurely to the table. It is my hope and prayer that we have not changed that policy, and that our National Security Advisor is not over there trying to put pressure on Ukraine. I do believe that would be inappropriate. We have said the right things in the beginning of this war, and that is we're going to support President Zelensky and the people of Ukraine in their sovereign decisions about how this war proceeds. And I think that is still the right thing to do. And I would just close this series of personal observations, these are mine, not that of my government, with why are we always having a discussion about Ukraine giving up, or not giving up, but curbing or limiting their requirements? Ukraine is defending its nation in an existential fight against an invader. Why are we not talking about going to Russia and telling Russia that it has to change its desires for the peace, since they are the invaders, they are the offenders, the rapists, the murderers, the kidnappers that are coming into Ukraine? That maybe be where we should start the conversations about Russia curbing its desires for the end of this war. Thanks for allowing me to vent just a little bit.
Oh, that's perfectly fine. Jean, you had a comment. You raised your hand.
A very quick one, actually building on what General Breedlove framed. I understand the US administration's policy on not allowing Ukraine or not wanting Ukraine to have Russian territory. But I think at this point we have to, and by us I mean some NATO capitals. The Brits, I know their stance is fine. Turkey, the Turkish government made it very clear as for Crimea. But even if we have the caveat or a policy caveat or not allowing Ukraine to hit Russian territory, how do we define Ukraine? How do we define Russia? And by Russia, if we mean Crimea, like not allowing Ukraine to hit Russian territory, if the German understanding, the Biden administration understanding, the understanding in Odesa, in Paris, if Crimea pertains to Russian territory, then what else we are discussing about? Then it's all over. If we just like put that caveat pertaining to Crimea, and if we just like rule out at the very outset, like it is the second round of invading Ukraine. The first round of invasion started back in 2014. Crimea is sovereign Ukrainian territory, and the Russians are invaders not only in other parts of Ukraine, like Kherson, but also Crimea. And when the Ukrainian military is striking Crimea, it is not hitting the Russian territory. I think this is a very starter discussion that we have to, I mean, like all NATO capitals should make their mind up about. Because like, again, like the bottom line, Ukraine hitting Crimea is not hitting Russian territory. Crimea is not Russian territory. Crimea is a sovereign Ukrainian peninsula that is currently under Russian invasion. Full stop. You discuss that, you put any caveat on that, it means you put a huge caveat on the post-Second World War world order that we know. End of European order, full stop.
Thank you. Do we have any parting? I wanted to ask you a question, General Havrilov, about the Iranian drones. There's some confusion. Some people say that these are flying mostly at night, but some people say there are also daytime attacks. Are they both, or are they primarily at night?
They are both. Majority is flying at daytime because it's easier to control by operators. But at the same time, we have a number of cases where Shahed type drones were used during the nighttime as well. So we don't see any limits with using these drones during the night or day.
Do you think most of the operators are Russian or Iranian, or a mix?
I think it's a mixture now. Of course, they started with Iranian operators because you have to feel the system. You have to smell the system. That's why they started with Iranian operators. And logically, some training for Russian operators should take place logically. We don't have any confirmation about that. So it's only from point of view of normal military. If you transfer some technology to other country, you have to train them to do how to use it. And we know there is a kind of communication between the Russian military and the Iranians on how to use it in the right way. Because Iranians, they are not really understand for that kind of warfare as well. They never been faced with that kind of air defense or sensor system like we have here in Ukraine. That's why for them it's also a challenge. But Russia, they have experience with our air defense, with our system of warfare. That's why there was a kind of, I think, a kind of combination of some kind of technical expertise provided by Iranians and some tactical things provided by Russian military.
Thank you. Well, I appreciate everybody's time and effort, and all our people that have listened in today. Some of our other panelists have other meetings today, and we'd like to go ahead and finish and wrap it up. And we appreciate General Havrilov taking time with the war to be able to speak to our audience today and also be and to share his thoughts as much as possible. So on behalf of the Jamestown Foundation, I thank you. We'll be posting this to YouTube, and we'll appreciate you joining us again in the near future. This is a subject that we'll be continuing to look at. So everyone, thank you very much and have a good day, and we hope to see you again.
Thank you.